My name is Nora Voss. I am 29 years old, and exactly 2 months ago, on the very evening my older sister was hosting a formal dinner to celebrate her engagement, my mother called me. She didn't scream, she didn't show anger, and she didn't try to veil her message in complex diplomacy. Her voice sounded even, with that specific, almost business-like chill, with which people usually announce a change in the commuter train schedule. "I am telling you this in advance, so there won't be any awkwardness," she said. And I remembered those words down to the last intonation, because I later reread the text message generated by her voicemail 4 times before placing the phone face down on the cold granite table. The venue has a strictly limited number of seats. The organizers and the restaurant manager have already finalized the guest list, and we cannot make adjustments. Do you understand? It will be much better if you simply skip this dinner. It will be easier for everyone. You understand, right? I understood. I had understood this perfectly for the last 26 years of my life. My sister, Evelyn, was 2 years older than me. In my childhood, our whole house functioned like a huge, well-oiled orbital system, at the center of which she exclusively revolved. It was for her childhood parties that matching themed dresses and color-coordinated invitations were ordered. It was her acceptance letter to a prestigious private school that stood in a carved oak frame in the most prominent place in the hallway. It was her whom my mother, at every family gathering, called our main asset and our pride. I was the younger one, the quiet girl who learned from an early age to move around the house noiselessly. The quiet girl who, around 12 years old, completely stopped asking to be taken to family trips to the theater or Sunday brunches, and instead set about passionately constructing her own, completely autonomous world. What exactly I built over those years, no one in my family ever even bothered to ask. For them, my absence in the shared space was not a mystery, but simply a convenient absence of noise. I grew up in a family where ambition, attention, and emotional resources were never distributed equally. My mother approached this with a systematic, mathematical pedantry that she herself probably didn't even realize. She simply had a basic personal preference, just as some people prefer blue to green or love cold weather more than sunny days. And she built the entire life of our home around this fundamental choice. Evelyn received a wardrobe from new collections for every September 1st. I wore her hand-me-down sweaters, jeans, and school blouses until I got my first part-time job at a bakery at 16 and started buying my own clothes. This is not a complaint about poverty, not at all. We were a comfortable, middle-class family. It was a conscious choice. A small, almost imperceptible choice that, repeated daily over 18 years, turns into something entirely measurable, a monumental wall between people. My only talent that no one at home ever took seriously was my palate. I understand that from the outside this might sound strange or even arrogant, but from early childhood, I was the very child who could unerringly tell the difference between tomato sauce prepared by Mom in August from fresh garden tomatoes from Grandma's cottage and sauce made in January from canned tomato paste. I could taste whether salted or unsalted butter was used in baking. I physically felt the moment when a dish lacked a pinch of acidity for balance, or a drop of quality fat to bind the texture. Mother considered this trait of mine an insufferable caprice. My sister laughed and called it stupid quirks. Father, a generally decent man, but completely insensitive and absorbed in his blueprints, simply shrugged his shoulders and said I was too picky about food. By 17, I knew firmly and unequivocally I wanted to cook professionally. Not at the level of home cooking for friends, not for catering small banquets or family holidays. I wanted real, fine, uncompromising restaurant cuisine. The very craft for which you wake up at 2 in the morning in a cold sweat because you just dreamed the right proportions of an emulsion for a sauce, and you frantically write it down in the dark on a scrap of a receipt so as not to lose the thought before morning. When the time came to apply to universities, I honestly announced my decision to my parents over dinner. Mother's response was instant and practical. The next morning, she printed out lists of law programs from 3 local colleges for me. Father, without looking up from the newspaper, remarked, "Cooking is a wonderful, very sweet hobby for a woman, but you need to have a real profession." My sister Evelyn, who was 19 then, and already planning a wedding with a man she would divorce 3 years later, adjusted her hair and tossed out, "You'll be standing on your feet 14 hours a day in the heat. Doesn't that sound disgusting and exhausting?" I silently gathered my documents and applied to the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, New York. I didn't say a word about it to a single living soul in the house until I received the official acceptance letter. But even when the thick envelope with the Institute's logo arrived in the mail, no one framed it to hang in the hallway next to Evelyn's diplomas. The years of study were a grueling trial. I worked 2 jobs simultaneously, paid off a student loan, and rented a tiny, smoke-filled apartment shared with 4 equally fanatical culinary students. Our kitchen resembled a 24/7 testing ground. On Tuesdays, we held wild free tastings for each other, testing the most insane combinations of textures and temperatures, and someone was bound to break a sauce or burn caramel at 3 in the morning. But it was the first place on earth where I felt completely, unreservedly at home. After graduation, I completed 3 internships at Manhattan restaurants, unpaid of course. That is the price you pay without complaint when you are building a foundational career and don't have the luxury of being impatient. Then I landed my first real position as a line cook at a small but iconic Franco-Japanese restaurant in the West Village. The chef there was a man who communicated with the staff exclusively in the language of what you did wrong and never what was done well. And he was, without the slightest doubt, the best teacher of my life. After 3 years of relentless shifts and absolute dedication, he recommended me to his colleague in Nashville, who was launching a conceptually new project. I packed my suitcase and left. I took the position of sous chef, and 18 months later, I was promoted to executive chef. The restaurant was named Wisteria. I didn't spread the word about this to my family. Not because I deliberately hid my success or played the mysterious persona, but simply because they had long since stopped asking questions about my life, and I had trained myself not to offer news to people who weren't interested. Mother vaguely knew that I worked somewhere in the food service industry. She described my work to acquaintances in the exact same way she did when I was 17. Nora does something in restaurants. I think she cooks in the kitchen sometimes. Once, at a family holiday I decided to attend, I heard my mother say to her friend over tea, "We still hope she'll eventually find something more stable and serious, but you know these creative girls, they are so fickle." The friend nodded sympathetically. I merely smiled faintly, set down my glass and went to the kitchen to help wash grease off the plates, because old, ingrained habits of yielding and being useful wash away very reluctantly. My sister Evelyn's engagement dinner was scheduled at Hargrove, one of the most prestigious and expensive establishments in the town where my parents live, about a 40-minute drive from Nashville. My future brother-in-law was a very pleasant, straightforward, and uncomplicated man. He ran a successful commercial real estate business and coached a children's soccer team on weekends. Evelyn had been dating him for about 2 years when she called to share the good news. Her exact phrase was, "We are hosting a celebration dinner at Hargrove next Saturday, and I just wanted to warn you in advance so you don't accidentally make any other plans for that day." Notice, that was not an invitation. She was simply informing me of the date so I wouldn't feel offended when I saw photos on social media. That care was almost touching in its refined cruelty. And 2 days before the dinner itself, Mother sent me that text message about the limited guest list and the finalized seating chart. I didn't engage in text messaging. I simply put my phone in my locker and went to work my shift. What I had absolutely no idea about on that Saturday evening, while tables were being set in the VIP hall of Hargrove for my family, was that at those exact minutes, 2 events were unfolding in parallel, to which I had contributed 0 effort. First, the authoritative national publication Food and Wine had published its annual and highly prestigious list of America's best new chefs that very morning, and my name, Nora Voss, was featured on that list. A full spread and article went live on their official website at 8 in the morning. The feature included a detailed profile, 4 professional photos from the kitchen, and a quote I had given to a journalist 3 months prior during a brief interview. I had agreed to the talk only because our PR manager begged me, and I promptly forgot all about it. I hate sitting around talking about myself. I am much more comfortable in constant motion among scalding pans. That quote read, "I learned to cook in a family where no one truly noticed me." Perhaps that is precisely why I cook the way I do, and not otherwise. Everything I create in this kitchen, I do in order to be noticed. Second, Hargrove, the restaurant my mother booked, had purchased ingredients for 3 of its signature dishes, 2 appetizers and a main course, specifically for that evening from a partner farm located on the outskirts of Nashville. It was a small organic farm that we at Wisteria had literally pulled from obscurity 2 years ago by making them our exclusive suppliers. The manager of Hargrove, a woman who had dined at my place in Nashville twice and knew my face well, decided to add a touch of sophistication to the evening and printed a small historical note about local ingredients on special menu cards. That note explicitly mentioned my name and my restaurant as a mark of the highest quality of supplied products. I was on shift when my phone in the locker room began ringing off the hook. Naturally, I didn't answer. I am always working during service, and I categorically ignore any personal messages when food is being pushed out. It was a Saturday. The dining room was packed to capacity, plus 2 private parties on the patio. I was only able to reach my phone closer to 11 at night when the flow of tickets finally dried up. The screen showed 14 missed calls. 6 from Mother, 3 from Grandma, 2 from an unfamiliar number, which turned out to be my aunt calling from a new phone, 1 from my sister, and a long voice message from her lasting 47 seconds. I sat down tiredly on the concrete step at the kitchen back door, right in my chef's jacket smelling of smoke and rosemary, and first called Grandma back. She picked up on the very first ring. "Why didn't you tell us anything?" she gasped. And that was when I learned about everything. Grandma read the entire Food and Wine article to me right over the phone. She is 73 years old, and she read the text to me slowly, stumbling over complex culinary terms, enunciating every word, while I sat on the cold concrete in the dark alley behind my restaurant at 11:15 p.m., clutching the phone with fingers trembling from exhaustion. When she finished reading, silence hung in the receiver, and then Grandma softly said, "My dear, you are simply incredible. Do you even understand that yourself?" "Thank you, Grandma," I replied, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "I kept telling everyone around for years that you would definitely do something very important in life," she continued. "I just never knew which words to pick. Now I know." Later, I pieced together the picture of what happened at my sister's engagement dinner in exact detail. I was not present in person, but the picture came together from fragments, from Grandma's stories, from an emotional call from my aunt, who called the next morning with barely concealed triumph in her voice, and from a 3-minute voice message from my cousin that arrived at 1 in the morning, where she whispered and laughed into the screen by turns. Dinner was scheduled for 7 in the evening. 30 guests, close relatives from both sides, and several key colleagues of the future groom. My mother chose Hargrove with a very specific goal. She wanted to showcase high status to make an impression on the groom's family, who possessed solid capital, and that specific gloss that always made my mother feel insecure and, as a result, display a painful snobbish ambition. Beautiful menu cards, printed on heavy textured paper, were laid out on the tables before the guests arrived. And it was at that moment that my mother's perfectly calculated script developed a crack. The groom's older sister, a woman who, as it turned out later, wrote restaurant reviews for a regional magazine and treated gastronomy with the passion of a professional, picked up a menu card, scanned the text briefly, and suddenly froze. She raised her head, looked around those present, and asked loudly across the entire table, "Excuse me, does anyone here have a connection to Nora Voss?" My mother hesitated for a second, forced a polite smile, and said, "I beg your pardon?" The journalist handed her the card, pointing her finger at the text. Nora Voss. She was just included in the list of America's best new chefs by Food and Wine. And this restaurant notes that the key dishes tonight are prepared from products supplied by her partner. That is an incredible level for our region, by the way. Mother stared at the card, then slowly shifted her gaze to Evelyn. Then back to the card. "Voss is my maiden name," she finally uttered. "Is she a relative of yours?" the groom's mother asked with vivid interest. The pause that followed that question, according to my cousin, lasted just long enough to become the most eloquent answer possible. "She is our younger daughter," Mother said, straightening her spine. "She works in the food service industry." By the time the waiters began serving the first course, the groom's entire family, 7 people sitting on the right side of the table, had already opened the full version of the Food and Wine article on their smartphones. In the main photo for the feature, I am standing in my white chef's jacket, right in front of the stainless steel pass. I am not smiling broadly, but looking straight into the camera lens with that exact expression that leaves no doubt. This woman knows precisely where she is, what she is worth, and what price she paid for this spot. One of the groom's cousins turned his phone screen toward Evelyn and said with a smile, "Listen, she looks strikingly like you. Is she really your full sister?" Evelyn looked at the screen. "Yes," she replied, and her voice, as my cousin put it, sounded like a heavy oak door slamming shut. And then the most interesting thing happened. My mother, realizing which way the wind was blowing, did what she did best. She leaned toward the groom's mother and in a semi-whisper, which was, however, perfectly audible to half the table, said with soft maternal sadness, "We are, of course, immensely proud of her. Nora has always been very independent, even wild. She hardly keeps in touch with the family, alas. But that is her nature. You know how unpredictable these creative personalities can be." The groom's father nodded understandingly. But then my aunt intervened in the conversation, a woman who in her entire life had never missed an opportunity to speak the truth to someone's face. "Why say it like that, Valerie?" Aunt said loudly across the table. "Nora keeps in touch wonderfully with both me and Grandma. And as far as I remember, she sent all of you personal invitations to her restaurant in Nashville twice, but none of you ever bothered to drive down to see her." The smile on my mother's face froze instantly. "That is absolutely not true," she attempted to counter. "And didn't she give you and Father a fully paid certificate for dinner for your birthday last year?" Aunt delivered the final blow. "I remember clearly because she called me to find out which days you were free. That was the pure truth. I had indeed reserved the best table in my restaurant, prepared a special tasting menu, and fully paid for the evening for my parents and sister." Mother had dryly replied on the phone back then that they would see according to their schedule. They never came. A ringing, awkward silence fell over the table, the kind that arises when outsiders accidentally witness a deep family wound. The future brother-in-law cleared his throat. He really was a nice guy. "Well," he diffused the atmosphere, "we definitely need to book a table there ourselves. I heard reservations at Wisteria are booked 3 months out." Evelyn didn't utter another word for the rest of the evening. The service continued. The food was good, including that main course whose ingredients grew on the farm nurtured by my team. The conversation at the table gradually drifted to discussing the upcoming honeymoon, but the ghost of the article didn't go anywhere. By the end of the dinner, 4 more guests approached my mother to congratulate her on her daughter being recognized as one of the best chefs in the country. And every time, she was forced to squeeze out, "Yes, we are very proud," in the tone of an actress who was handed a script for a completely unfamiliar role 30 seconds before walking onto the stage. My sister's engagement ceased to be the main topic of her own celebration. I say this without the slightest malicious glee or bitterness. I didn't plan this. I didn't take a single action to ruin her evening. I simply existed. I simply did my job honestly. And that work turned out to be too visible to be ignored any longer. The voice message from Evelyn lasted 47 seconds. For the first 5 seconds, only her heavy, ragged breathing could be heard in the speaker. "I don't know how you managed it," she said in a strained voice, trembling with resentment. "You didn't even come to my dinner, but somehow you made sure everyone was talking only about you. I hope you are absolutely happy." Then came a long pause. My sister's voice dropped to a whisper. "Food and wine, Nora? Seriously? You couldn't even just tell me beforehand?" And she hung up. I listened to that recording twice. Then pressed the delete button. I didn't do anything on purpose. I simply stopped hiding in the shadows. The next morning, I called Grandma again, and we talked for a whole hour. She confessed with a laugh that for the last 10 years, she had been proudly telling her friends in the yard that I worked at some establishment called Hargrove that didn't even exist, because she got the names mixed up. "I should have asked you directly, my dear," Grandma said softly at the end of the conversation. "I shouldn't have just believed what your mother said. I am to blame before you." "You are not to blame for anything, Grandma," I answered. "Will you cook something for me in your restaurant?" "Grandma, I will cook whatever you want for you. Anywhere." "That's wonderful then," she sighed, "because I feel like I missed out on too much time." Mother called 2 days later. I didn't pick up the phone. I let the call go to voicemail. The message she left was, in its own way, a masterpiece of masterful reality avoidance. She said in a cheerful voice that she hoped I was doing well. She said the engagement dinner went simply wonderfully. She said we ought to meet up and chat sometime. And at the very end, lowering her tone, she added, "I know that perhaps we didn't always give you the support you deserved. I think it's just an unfortunate misunderstanding. Normal communication issues." Communication issues. I listened to that voicemail during the morning prep work for lunch service. My hands automatically executed familiar razor-sharp movements, chopping shallots, perfect cubes of butter, the aroma of fresh garlic just tossed into a preheated pan. I simply laid the phone face down on the prep table and didn't call her back. Father sent a short text message a week later. He was never a man to call if there was an option to send a text. Read the article. Looks like things are really working out great for you. Mom and I would like to stop by your restaurant sometime if you don't mind. I read it during a prep break, standing in the backyard with a cup of cooling coffee. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a recognition of those years when my craft was demeaned with phrases like, "She does something in the kitchen." It wasn't an acknowledgement of why I wasn't invited to my sister's dinner. It was simply a slightly cracked open door, just as much as their bruised pride allowed. I thought about that message for almost 2 weeks before typing a reply. I would be glad. Let me know when you plan to be in Nashville, and I will reserve the best table for you. It wasn't forgiveness. No, and perhaps forgiveness in the conventional sense of the word will never exist. But it was an opportunity. A tiny, fragile opportunity that needs to be held very carefully with both hands, the way one holds a crystal glass that could shatter into pieces from too much pressure. Evelyn never wrote again. I spent a long time thinking about what I would say to her when she finally decided to reach out, and ultimately came to a crystal clear conclusion. I don't need prepared speeches. I don't need a dramatic moment of resolution. Truth doesn't require a special stage or direction. It has already taken place. Here is what I know for sure now, standing on the threshold of my 30s. I spent years burning away at scorching stoves in closed rooms, where no one from my family ever came just to look at me. I sent invitations that remained unanswered. I built a complex, demanding, beautiful career that no one among my relatives ever even asked about. And none of that stopped me. Nothing made me slow down my pace. If I am being completely honest with myself, that multi-year silence around me became my primary freedom. No one was watching me, which meant I couldn't disappoint anyone. You build entirely differently when you build in the absence of an audience, without looking back at others' expectations, without trying to earn token praise. Now I stand in the kitchen of my restaurant, Wisteria. The clock reads 6:30 a.m. There are still 2 full hours left before the first-line cooks and sous chefs arrive. A huge eastern window lets in thick, pale golden light that only happens on cold October days. 40 minutes ago, the truck from the farm market arrived. On the stainless steel table sits a wooden crate of late-harvest ripe strawberries. I don't know yet what exactly I will make out of them. A dessert, a sauce for poultry, or a complex marinade. I will think about it in a minute. I will definitely come up with something. On the wall near the pass station hangs a simple oak frame that I hung 2 months ago. In it rests the printed article from Food and Wine. I hung it there not because I desperately need external validation. I know perfectly well who I am. I know the price of my every step. I know what I paid for this professional level. I hung it up to see it during those quiet hours when the kitchen is still empty, and the day's work is just beginning. To remind myself, all of this happened in reality. This is completely real. I built this world myself, from the very first brick, from the exact point where no one was looking at me. If you right now are passing through your own years of invisibility, if you are cooking, building, writing, designing, or doing any other hard work that your loved ones don't even bother to ask about, I want to tell you something personally. It is absolutely enough to be seen through your work. It is more than enough to build something so monumental that it will know your name even when the people who are obligated to know it by right of birth didn't bother to learn it. Recognition will come, or it won't come at all. Family will understand your scale, or remain trapped in their illusions. But what you create with your own hands every day remains real, regardless of their opinion. Do not cook for their applause. Cook because food is honest and work is clean. And because somewhere out there, in a dining room, whose existence you don't even suspect yet, a person is sitting right now. They will take a bite of your dish and feel the exact same thing you meant when you stood at the stove in solitude. That is enough. That has always been absolutely enough. The strawberries on the table are waiting. The kitchen belongs to me. And for the first time in a very long time, I no longer need anyone's permission or invitation to step into the rooms I built for myself.